Hello guys, and welcome to another deck tech video from FabChaos. Today I bring you Aurora. That's the list that we will be using at Pro Tour London. That's in a few days from now. Probably when this is live, the London event will already have happened. So, wishes luck. Um, so let's move forward quickly to Aurora is a much discussed hero. You probably have seen her, perform a lot. And mainly I want to focus on this deck tech on some very specific card choices and why we thought as a team that it was the correct way or correct approach, the correct deck to use at this current meta game. So obviously the this deck was mainly brought by Alexandros Argyriou, and I also got this list and we tinkered a bit to get into this final product. So I'm here to show you why we're using the specific cards. So in general, the Armory deck, that's where I want to begin. The Armory deck brought a lot of new tools, and it was a huge discussion at the beginning. What parts of it are interesting, what you need, what you don't, and the biggest thing I think, and the biggest reason why I think the Aurora Armory deck was powerful was it was much easier to use a card like Face Purgatory, and Face Purgatory is one of those cards that actually help you a lot in a lot of matchups. The current meta game includes a lot of decks like Florian or the more mid-range strategies, and Face Purgatory and in the mirror as well is really important because actually having this really strong defensive tool while keep drawing the extra card and keeping the pressure up is actually great. So first of all, Aurora is probably right now, the boogeyman of the current format. And what you need to do, what you love doing with this deck and specifically this list is that the numbers you present out of every turn cycle are just tremendous a lot of times. So what you're planning to do is use as many forgo against as possible and do this way above average turn cycle. And obviously, a quick note to really powerful cards like Electromagnetic Somersault or, Burn Up Sock. Obviously, the MVP of the deck, Channel Lightning Volley. So you can see in this deck, we have all the staples you need to have an operational Aurora deck. So, in this build, Skyward Serenade is tremendous. Giving you access to an unconditional forgo again with that's already lighting. Being lighting matters a lot in many situations. It's a non-attack that fuels also the Purgatory, and it was a really important centerpiece to do. The drawback of running 3 copies of Skizik in your deck are not as high as we thought at the beginning, and the reason is that cards like Enlightened Strike sometimes, or the fact that Skizik already blocks for 3 and, pitching to the weapon to maintain a channel Lightning Volley and stuff are turn sequencings where you don't really mind having access that. So the drawback felt to our testing that actually running 3 copies of Skizik is not that bad, and Skyward Serenade was tremendous. I think we've played a bunch of games. I don't think I've ever almost used this card to not create an embodiment and fetch for a Skizik, but there are some niche situations where you can actually use the other modes. But, this card already packs a lot of strength because it's yellow, so you can create an embodiment. It's lighting, so it can help you keep channel. So a really interesting card. And the other really important card that felt really strong in the deck was Written in the Stars. What you accomplish with running 3 copies of Written in the Stars in your main deck and the 3 copies of Current Funnel is that the number 6 in blues actually feels quite natural. I mean, having access to 3 blues means that you do not it's quite rare for you to overdraw blues and have these brick hands where you don't know what to do. Your blue's already blocked for 3, and it's a nice packaging. Also, the interaction between arc lighting and written in stars, even though it feels marginal, it's something that comes out quite a lot. I don't think you have ever supposed to try and set up, an arc lighting written in stars, because that most of the time transforms written in the stars into a free damage and moves the Guardian to the next card, because Arc Lighting actually gives Guardian to the next action card you play, so that also targets Written in the Stars. Really interesting scenario. So, compared to the more traditional Aurora decks, we are missing the lightning non-attacks that gives +3 to the next attack, and we have trimmed the Arcanite Shockwaves, we have trimmed the Lightning Surges, Scar for a Scar, Second Strike, and Static Shock. These cards are powerful, that's why we felt we still needed to keep the 2 copies, but you need to make some space in order to include the Skyward Serenade and the Skyzik. And it's not that these cards are bad, like Scar for a Scar running more copies or Second Strike, but the thing is that it's way more clunky sometimes. You want your deck to be as compact as possible, and having access to cards that get, running too many cards that do not always have Guardian or do not always get their value sometimes is a bit clunky, because in general, if your deck does its thing, these insane lines of 4 Guardian into 4 Guardian into Dagger into another 4 power card with a hit effect like an active burn-up shock or snatch, or even in sometimes static shock, and then making an embodiment to keep, this thing rolling, is actually really important. Obviously, at this metagame, Exude Confidence probably, for me, has to be the MVP of the deck, and that was the reason for me that personally forced me to move from a more traditional defensive playstyle, as I mainly play new and assassins and stuff. This card was a nightmare to play against, and putting this pressure in the opponent to, the opponents most of the time are in the defensive a lot, so they pack as many defense reactions as possible to prevent all those breakpoints that your deck generates. So having access to a card like Exude Confidence is really great, because it messes a lot with the sequencing they want to do while defending and stuff. So nothing too exciting or too new in the core of the deck. That's pretty much the core of the deck. Most of these cards are in every single matchup. I also have the sideboard guide in the notes if you guys want to check this out. And there is no matchup where we core cards like the blues or, Skyward Serenade or Channel, etc, etc. Ravenous Rabble is still an enormous card, like 4 go again, Unconditional is really great going in a flash, but if you guys experienced Aurora, you can see a lot of these play patterns. So if you guys noticed already, there is a sneaky Crown of Dominion here in the equipment list, and that's because in the sideboard we are running the full combo package, and I think that's probably the thing I wanted to talk most about. We will go through most of the matchups quite a bit. Again, I have the notes in the sideboard. You can guys want to check this out if you want to try out these lists. So why we chose as a team to move into the Flicker Wisp Arcite Lighting combo with the full package with the Aether Iron Weave and the Crown of Dominion. So the main reason was, the reason that we started testing this thing was mainly Enigma. The Enigma players have quite figured out a quite effective way to play, and Aurora struggles a bit versus decks that play really defensive and have some ways to outvalue you, because whether you like it or not, sometimes, Channel Lightning Volley is a great card, an enormous card, but the thing is that a lot of times it's one less attack in your turn, it's one less threat. So when are these turns versus Enigma specifically where you want to pressure the board? Sometimes the pressure is not enough, and Enigma starts building up a board and you never have the time to catch up. So our answer to that was to actually run the full combo. It really helps because it really puts a pressure in the Enigma player to need to answer you, to need to have these answers and these threats and these disruption pieces to actually stop you from preventing that. So a quick run through the combo. What you're planning to do is that you need one copy of Arc Lighting and one copy of Flicker Wisp and any attack, and you're playing Flicker Wisp into Arc Lighting, sometimes the other way around. We will talk about this. And afterwards you play any attack. It has Go Again from Arc Lighting, and now every single Go Again you trigger with Arc Lighting actually deals 2 arcane damage. And after you've played your attack, now you can use your Ether Iron Weave because you've played an attack and the non-attack action, and you generate 2 resources, you deal them 2 arcane damage, you pop the gold from Crown of Dominion, draw an extra card, hopefully an extra card with Go Again, and you do this huge turn that actually gives you the life swing and, you know, gives you the luxury of not caring after that point to play a value game versus most of the decks where you want to side in the combo, because the moment you perform the combo, most of the time you get a huge life lead, or you know, you do a huge catch-up turn, and afterwards it's way easier to operate Aurora on the aggressive plan while you have the tempo, while you are the one that actually presents the threats rather than being on the receiving end, which most of the time, you know, probably the biggest weakness of Aurora is when she's forced to be in the defensive because, you know, instant don't block so well, there are a quadrillion 2 blocks, your really small hands most of the time do not have that impressive plays, etc. So moving the Enigma matchup into a position where you are always the one presenting threats after the combo goes through is a really strong way to actually make a matchup that's, you know, about even to have a slightly favored, have an actual positive, you know, thing into this matchup. So let's move a bit into what other matchup, the other matchup I want to talk about where we're using the combo. The other matchup that felt really hard to face against was Florian, where pretty much the same approach goes on. So Florian actually loved, is actually one of the very few decks that can go head to you, you know, can play an even game with you and do not get outvalued because of their huge armor piece, their, you know, purgatory, their, you know, the chest that generates embodiments. They have all the defensive tools, a quadrillion defense reactions. Most of them they do not even care about exude because they already run attack actions, so they don't really care about the effect of exude confidence. So Florian was a really hard matchup to tackle, and I think we will see in the Pro Tour London that Florian's perform really well, and I'm really excited to see what other Aurora players will bring to face this matchup, because Florian is a deck that can definitely have a good matchup into Aurora if some things happen. So the combo again does exactly that. What you're planning to do versus Florian is that you want to be really fast. At the beginning, their turns are not so effective, so you don't mind taking some damage and attack them to keep the pressure up. And follow that up with an Arc Lighting Flicker Wisp combo and pretty much seal the deal. Pretty much, you know, force them into the defensive, into closing out the game. So that was the 2 main reasons. Florian and Enigma were the 2 main reasons why we chose to go with the combo line rather than having the combo sideboards, rather than have these, you know, slightly more defense reactions, slightly more efficient cards in some other matchups, etc. So I think this is a pretty solid list if you're enjoying Aurora as long as he's live. So other cards I want to talk about was that, probably Sigil of Suffering, if you've played into Aurora, is one of the MVPs of the deck. This card does anything, is one of these really above curve and above rate cards that the deck has access to, and an enormous card. So we went for the 3 copies of Shelter of the Storm compared to the more traditional Sing Belows and stuff, mainly out of respect for Assassins, I want to say. You really want to have access to a few more defensive tools, and even though Sink Below can get you out of some really tough situations, most of the time the deck is pretty compact on its own, so you don't really need this extra cycling, while having access to Shelter for the Storm while facing Arachne Marionette or, Sleepy, it's really strong to have access to a card that can actually fight flick knives. And obviously the same goes for Syndra. So what uh, what are the best matchups for Aurora and what are the weaker matchups? So mainly any of the decks that are not heavy in the meta right now, and by that I mean any deck that's not Enigma, Nu, Florian, or Zen. I think these are probably one of the strongest decks, and we are expecting these decks to have really high popularity in Pro Tour London. So apart from these 4 decks, one of the really strong aspects of Aurora is that she's a huge gatekeeper. There are so many decks that really interact bad with the mixed damage. A deck like Funk really doesn't like, that you're pitching. A deck like, Azalea, the list goes on and on. Any warrior doesn't really enjoy playing versus you, etc., etc. So, another matchup I want to sit on a bit was, for a lot of people, Vincent was supposed to be one of the decks that had a really good matchup to the more traditional streamlined Aurora, but with the access of Purgatory, actually this matchup now feels really good to be an Aurora deck. So I think that was the nail in the coffin maybe for Vincent in Pro Tour London. We'll see about that. Hopefully we might see some exciting decks as well. And the other huge problem you have was versus Zen. Zen is a deck that unfortunately we haven't committed too many cards because I don't think there are. We thought that there wasn't any card package that could actually push the Zen matchup into your favor enough to justify the deck slots, like the whole combo package. So I'm expecting a lot of Auroras to have a much more dedicated sideboard in order to face Zen, because Zen is also one of the roughest matchups. And the main reason probably has to be the Zen State token. Playing versus Zen with Zen State token is a really, pain. So what you really want to do versus Zen was that you want to move the game as away as possible from the state where Zen signs. And this state is probably when they have a defensive Zen state token, or, when they play this mid game of attacking with few cards and blocking with few cards, So Zen is a really rough matchup, but the good thing about Aurora is that, sometimes her numbers are so great that even a deck like Zen sometimes, draws a few too many Cs, or, their defense reactions are not on the correct sequencing. Versus Zen, there is also why Exude signs, because the new age Zen decks are more focused into playing a slightly slower metagame compared to what it was when Mistveil first came out, where they had these explosive, huge turns and wanted to play with 5 cards every turn. And Exude Confidence is probably the most key card in this matchup, because messing up their sequencing can actually mean that you generate enough turn-by-turn value that even when they generate the Zen State token, you can move into defensive slightly more, you can move into defensive position slightly more, and with cutting a few of the instants and running some D-React, you can actually pull that off. So, yeah, I think Aurora is a pretty solid deck in the Pro Tour. There are going to be a quadrillion. Aurora is probably the most represented deck. That's pretty much our take on Aurora Shooting Star for the Pro Tour London. The other thing I wanted to comment was the mirror match. There are a lot of lists, there are a lot of sideboard plans versus Aurora where they're running Balance of Justice, and that was a card that was really rough for us to cut, because Balance of Justice actually forces the opponent Aurora to some weird situations where they can't actually be too greedy with their channels and their snatches and, you know, the E-Strike draws effect, etc. But we felt like we felt that in most situations the Aurora mirror match actually slows down a bit, and if the opponent is constantly in a spot where they have access to triggering your Balance of Justice, they can sometimes simply play around. And Face Purgatory, on the other hand, is really great if you can prevent a big channel turn, or, you know, you can prevent a burn up sock turn. That's actually pretty relevant, because even if you do not get the value of actually blocking for 7 or 8 with Face Purgatory, the fact that you strip a card from their hand most of the time is enough to prevent a burn up sock, to prevent a channel Lightning Valley from going through. And that's quite important because the game is actually pretty fast. So having a big defensive tool in the first few turns of the game is actually really important into this matchup. And also Cellar of the Storm was another reason that you wanted to have access to these annoying breakpoints that Aurora presents you. And also, of course, Cellar of the Storm for defense value is really strong into facing a deck like that. So in general, that's it. Again, you can find all the matchup with a few sideboard nodes compared to whether you're going first or second. If you want to try Aurora in your local events, or hopefully we do well and you want to see what we played in Pro Tour London, so here it is. So, guys, thanks for dropping by. You can find the link in the description. Thanks a lot for being here, and I'll see you around until the next deck check. See ya!